Promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with, but the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So you got to talk about another far-right conspiracy theory that has turned out to be true, okay? The liberal media is admitting the far-right conspiracy that illegal immigrants are contributing to the housing crisis in this country. The fact that housing, the price has skyrocketed, rents have skyrocketed, the price of shelter has skyrocketed. The reason for that, or part of the reason, a significant reason for that happening, has to do with more illegals being in the country, okay? More immigration into the country. Now, anybody with common sense can come to this conclusion, okay? More demand, less supply, supply not able to keep up with a shock in demand in which you have tens of millions of illegals coming to the country, okay? Plus other immigrants as well too. Yeah, that type of short-term demand boost is going to create supply shortages, and that is going to drive up the price of housing. Basic stuff, okay? But the mainstream liberal media, okay, and their economists, right, the elites, okay, the people who know everything, the arbiters of truth, said, no. This is a conspiracy theory when J.D. Vance proposed mass deportations as a part of the solution that is needed to bring down the cost of housing in this country. Take a look.
You're basically saying the United States doesn't have meaningful border policy. And the Mexican drug cartels have become the wealthiest criminal organization maybe in the entire world because of what Kamala Harris has done at the border. Not to mention, like, I'm a big believer in the social contract in this country. Like, I benefited sometimes from a generous United States government, meaning a generous United States taxpayer that made it possible for us to afford things that we wouldn't have always been able to afford. So when you bring in millions upon millions of people, you degrade and destroy the social trust that's necessary to support any kind of a modern support for poor people, food assistance, housing assistance. You are not going to have that stuff if you allow millions upon millions of people into this country illegally, and then they get to take advantage of it.
Well, let's say you were successful in carrying out those mass deportations. One thing that everyone agrees on is that more housing is necessary in this country, right? The reason that there is a housing crisis is that not enough houses have been built.
And that we have 25 million people who shouldn't be here.
Well, I mean, this is the thing.
I think it's both.
I know you do. I don't think that many people who look into this agree with you, but about a third of the construction workforce in this country is Hispanic. Of those, a large proportion are undocumented. So how do you propose to build all the housing necessary that we need in this country? By removing all the people who are working in construction.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that, okay? The liberal media mocked J.D. Vance for his suggestion that, hey, illegal immigrants are contributed to the cost of housing in this country. They are contributing to Americans struggling to find shelter. Now, we know for a fact that this is true, okay, because new data has been released about the U.S. homelessness rate and how much it has spiked this year alongside the invasion at the border, right? The mass illegal immigration into the country. Yes, that has contributed to actual Americans going homeless. So without further ado, let's react to TYT, going over this story, in which, again, they admit that a far-right conspiracy theory is, in fact, true.
Federal government reports that there has been a double-digit jump in American homelessness compared to last year, and an even bigger jump among families.
According to the government's latest data, more than 770,000 people were unhoused in a single night in 2024, up 18% from the year before and the highest number ever recorded.
And those shocking numbers were released by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They looked at the number of homeless people between January of 2023 and January of 2024 and noticed that pretty steep spike in the number of people living on the streets in the United States. Now, what is behind this massive increase in homelessness? Well, if you read most news reports, they just simply say housing prices are too high, which is true. But what's driving the increase in housing prices? Why is housing so unaffordable? Well, we're about to break that down for you piece by piece. But before we do, there's something that you should keep in mind. So again, this data was collected by taking a snapshot of one night in January of 2023 and then comparing it to one night in January of 2024. So the numbers are about a year old. And putting that aside, let's dive into what the findings were. So the report on homelessness was, again, put together by the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the numbers are very bleak. So nearly every category of unhoused people grew, with the rise especially steep among children, 33%, and people in families, 39%. The number of people in shelters rose by about a quarter, while unsheltered homeless rose 7%. The rise in homelessness among older adults continued as well, with a 6% growth in those 65 or older. Now, much of the report actually focuses on one of the main factors behind this. So they talk about how the influx of asylum seekers immigrating to the country has exacerbated the housing crisis, because we already had a housing crisis spurred by the shortage of housing units available. And so here's what they found. Migration had a particularly notable impact on family homelessness, which rose 39% from 2023 to 2024. In the 13 communities that reported being affected by migration, family homelessness more than doubled. Whereas in the remaining 373 communities, the rise in families experiencing homelessness was less than 8%. So I mean, this is, in my opinion, just simple numbers, logic, supply and demand. There was already high demand for limited housing units, and then you introduce an additional population into the country when you haven't really increased the housing inventory, and it's going to, again, exacerbate the problem. And so during the Biden administration, before he did his executive order for the southern border, he had paroled 1.4 million asylum seekers into the country. Obviously, that's going to have an impact on homelessness when we don't have enough housing to withstand the increase in population.
Ding, 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 ding. Again, I want you guys to understand that the far left economists said, no, this was not a thing. Like, this is not something that is happening. Illegal immigrants are not contributing to the increase in the price of housing. That's not true. They are, right? They are a part of the reason why there is a housing shortage, due to the fact that there's more demand for the housing and there's not enough supply to meet that demand, especially coming out of the pandemic where we had supply chain shortages, and then you have all these illegals coming in, driving up the demand even more. And again, you're kind of in short supply to a certain extent because of what happened during the pandemic. But again, the left-wing economists said, no, this is not true, right? Now, I know that Democrats are kind of racist. Okay, they're kind of racist. They probably believe that 10 Mexicans live in one small home, right? One trailer or whatever, right? So they probably don't think they need that much housing, okay, for the people that they're letting into the country. I know that's what the Democrats and the liberals think, but you still need a lot of housing if you're letting in 10 plus million people into the country, right? Still a lot of housing. So everybody with common sense knew that this was real, knew that this was a thing. Now all of a sudden, here comes the government, here comes the mainstream liberal media admitting what everybody else already knew long before they acknowledge reality. Again, common sense will take you a long way. It really will, especially when it comes to politics.
Yeah, so there's a number of factors that leads to homelessness and the rise in homelessness. So when you look at the different factors, you have to try to separate them out to the best of your ability. So we had a lot of these factors earlier, but when the migrant wave came, the numbers went up. And so you see that how it adds to the numbers, right? And you go, okay, that's the difference. And that's why that doesn't mean the migrant crisis is the only thing causing it. It's just saying that it's causing some significant percentage of the increase that's happening. Right?
Yeah, and that's a problem. That's a big deal. No matter how you try to square it, what you're saying is that illegal immigrants, people who are not citizens, are causing actual Americans to lose their homes, to go homeless. So quite literally, we're kicking Americans out and putting them on the street and allowing people who are not Americans to occupy their homes. That's what we're doing. There's no other way you can square this. Americans are going homeless due to a spike in illegal immigration. Illegal immigration is literally putting the American people last. And the effed up part about it is that the American people that are affected by this are those that are most unfortunate, that are in the most dire situations, at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Those are the people being negatively affected by this. So illegal immigration is essentially just telling them you're no longer useful. In fact, get out of your home, leave, and we're going to import a new population who are more useful than you are, right? Because they'll work for cheap, okay? And that's what's happening. And then on top of that, you have the government subsidizing this housing, okay? You have that happen as well too. So you got the government paying for it as well. Again, naturally, what happens as a result is housing prices are going to skyrocket. That's going to contribute to a shortage in housing. Common sense stuff.
Right? So now there's other factors though as well, which is how do you treat folks? And so we're gonna get into that a little bit. Do you do housing first or do you try to get them medical treatment or addiction treatment, et cetera? And I think that overall, there's some cities that have done a wonderful job. Houston got rid of their bureaucracy, mainlined it, and actually got homelessness down by 40% at one point. Utah built houses and got homelessness down significantly at another point. So we've seen some successes on things that could work, but largely most of those areas are not doing those successful strategies. They're doing other strategies that just simply aren't working.
Right.
And they're also misdirecting a lot of our money and not actually spending it on the homeless.
Exactly. So, California is a good example of that. I know you guys have heard me talk about this repeatedly because it's really important to prevent this from happening again in the future. California residents allocated $24 billion, increasing their own taxes in order to solve the homelessness crisis. That money gets funneled to nonprofits, some of which are founded by friends and family members of politicians in California. And let's just say that money did not go to where it was intended to go. And there have been some audits that have found wrongdoing by a lot of these nonprofits. But nonetheless, to your point, Cenk, I think the failure of the housing first policy is that it pursues a one size fits all approach to this issue. And this isn't a simple issue. This is actually a much more complex issue. We do need to build more housing. There's no question about that. But there are people who are struggling on the streets with severe addiction or severe mental health issues. So if you are someone who has a severe mental health condition, right? Let's say paranoid schizophrenia or something like that, you haven't been getting the medical care you need. Just taking you and putting you in a apartment unit is not going to solve the problem. And so it is more complicated than I think some of the advocates are making it out to be. But going back to the migrant issue, I also want to clarify one thing because it's important. So the data does generally suggest that communities with high immigration levels also experience high levels of homelessness. But homelessness in areas that didn't have high levels of immigration also saw an increase. And it's because, again, it's the same problem. We don't have enough housing. And if you have high demand, low supply, that's gonna drive up housing prices. And when people can't afford it, they end up living in their cars or they end up going to a shelter. That is a huge problem here. Dennis Culhane, who's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, who has long advised the government on homelessness data, said that about 3/4 of the increase in homelessness occurred in the 4 states hit hardest by asylum seekers: New York, Illinois, Colorado, and Massachusetts. Along with Hawaii, this is the second factor, where wildfires in Maui fueled mass displacement. So a lot of these natural disasters are causing problems with homelessness as well, because people get displaced, there's nowhere for them to turn to, a lot of them end up in shelters. It's just a disaster all around.
Yeah. So, like I said, another right-wing conspiracy turns out to be true, okay? And people wonder why the American people question whether or not we should continue to have this type of mass immigration, legal or illegal, really, into this country. Right? This is why we're having these debates. This is why we're having these conversations. And I don't think that it is out of bounds to suggest that we've taken in so many people in this country that we have to hit a pause button on immigration. Not permanently, but just for a little bit. Okay? Just for a little bit. Figure out what the hell is going on. Deport at least 1 million of the illegals who have come into the country, and then go from there. Because look at what is happening right now. We literally do not have enough housing for more people. So how can you talk about bringing in more people, illegally or legally, when we don't have housing for them? Housing prices have skyrocketed. So if you start bringing in a bunch of these individuals, again, legal or illegal, you start bringing in a whole bunch of them, that's only going to make the problem worse. We don't have enough homes. We don't have enough places for these people to stay. So I'm just saying, I don't think it's unreasonable to have a conversation about legal immigration, right? And just immigration in general, and just ask the question of, are we too full? I did a story about Canada. Justin Trudeau, not too long ago, came out and admitted that, yeah, we imported too many people, right? Too many students, too many legal and illegal immigrants, and it shot up the cost of housing. Shot up the cost of housing and shot up the cost of rent. So we know for certain this happens. It's just funny to me how the so-called economists, the liberals, the progressives, who again claim to be arbiters of truth, everything they say is correct, everything that the right says is a conspiracy theory, how come they're always taking these L's? How come after the fact they always have to come out and admit that the so-called conspiracy theories were in fact correct? Okay, all it took was some common sense. But because these people don't have common sense, that is why they are liberal, right? That is why they are leftist, and that's why they continue to get proven wrong. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.